Okay. So while this is going, I'll come back to this again. In the meanwhile, I imported this validator. So, like I said, so this is a very controller specific representation of a particular form, right? So validators that are required is among many a particular. Hey, Tarun, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can
Oh,
hear, but some noises are there. That's why I asked you.
mm,
Some extra noises, something fan or something kind of noise is there, I think.
okay. Is it better now?
It's better, but still coming. Oh, whatever, we can hear you, no problem. No.
ठीक है, ठीक है, ठीक है. Okay, this is I think coming from here. Oh, yeah. So a validator technically represents certain validations you would have on a particular form field, and gives a very interesting way for us to actually create a bunch of validations attach it to a certain field, right? You don't want these validations to be inside the HTML, which is a normal standard. Which is when you look at certain forms, validations are put inside the HTML. That you would have input, then you have the pattern, and then you put stuff over there. But in most cases, validators at the UI level at least, they tend to contain some business logic. Does this person is this particular person who is getting selected is a particular person belonging to a certain group? Is he contained in the database? Does it make sense to have this sort of value? You don't want these sort of things to be there in the HTML or even as a separate directive, right? These are business logic specific to a very a particular input of a particular form. Okay. So I think my application is running right now. It probably won't be. There's nothing right now. So we have this form group which has a particular name and an email. Okay. So what we would want to do now is go to Angular Material and create a very basic form. Okay. So the first question comes is I have created this form group. This is a controller representation of a form. So what is the corresponding portion inside the HTML? Right. So you would probably you would have a form group. So you have a form over here. And this is how we attach a particular form group to a particular form. Right? So you do form group is equal to LG. So if you're familiar with Angular, you would understand that anything within square braces is an input for that particular tag. Okay? And anything between circle braces is what you call a output. Okay? So we are essentially passing form inside this form. Okay? And now everything inside this is linked to the corresponding form group that we have over here. Okay? So if I just have two inputs over here, input type text, and we have two of these, you you they are not necessarily attached to these things right here right now. So how would you attach those? Form control. Form control name, we have name and email. Name. And let's also add a button over here just for the sake of seeing what is inside this. So we'll just print. We may attach a method called onClick, and this onClick method over here. Inside onClick, what we do is we console log a bunch of things to see what is happening inside the form. Okay. First thing we print is this.hg.value. We do this.hg.valid. We do console of this.hg.errors. Okay. These three are the most interesting things that you would see, and there are a bunch of other stuff also I'll come to this. Okay, right? Okay, let's just put in some text over here. This is too terrible to look at right now. Right now, you have two input fields and you have one click button. Okay. This is a very light click from right now. So if I click on click, you see what comes over here. We have an empty name and empty email. Um, the value of valid comes as false and the error comes as null. Right. Okay. If I click over here, now if I click, this is the same thing. If I try writing some stuff over here, okay, you see the value comes up over here. For the corresponding name, you see the valid is still false and error is still null for some. You come over here. Okay. You see the corresponding values get reflected here. So ideally, at the form level, this might seem very unintuitive, but the errors which would corresponding come up for a form group are here. So validations, while you have validations for every form control, you can also put in new validations for every group which is there. Okay. The way to add them is to add them directly over here as the second argument of the form group. That is form group level validation. Okay. These are normally cases where you have a particular validation corresponding to two fields. That is, if someone's name is suppose Ayush, his email has to have those two terms. If you have a very weird business rule like that, that is a that is a whole form level like validation, and you would have to put them over here. That is, and then the corresponding errors would come up over here. But if you want to look at errors corresponding to certain controls which are here, you would have to access the corresponding controls. So how do we access those? I access the controls or a dictionary of this form. Then I go dot name dot errors. And then do the same for email. So you see the errors which came up over here is required to for both of these. Okay. Now if I type in some values inside the name, this error is no longer there, but the second error required to is still here. Okay. So and the whole thing, the validation of the whole thing, the valid value changes to true only when the both of the conditions are satisfied. So you see how the whole form group gives a representation, a controller specific representation of a particular form. Okay. Now you would see multiple cases coming up where you won't be just one validator, but multiple validators. So the first thing you might think, second argument error. Okay. You would do something like this. Validators dot max. Okay. And this won't work. Okay. The reason behind this is the inside this array, the first validator is the normal validator and the second validator is the async validator. Okay. So the sync validators, the things that happen without an API call or can happen on the validations which can happen on sync has to be on the first argument. The second argument are for async validators, which are rarely used. So I won't be talking about. Okay. So how to create a particular a validator which compromises a bunch of things, you use validators.compose. Okay. Validators.compose takes in a bunch of validators. So required validator that's then suppose let's say 3 and stuff like this. Okay. You also have validators for patterns and stuff like this. You can even create custom validators. You just have to define a method which returns a particular object and just put it over here. There are multiple blog posts out there about how to create your own custom validator. So you won't go through them. It's very easy to do for you to study this. Check it out. Okay. So right now, if you see, if I type something over here, this comes as true. But you see, I put a max length of 23. So what happens if I type, suppose, say, let's do one thing. So this thing has more than number of characters over here. I make this and raise the whole thing. Right now, you see the max length, required length, actual length, the proper error came. So creating valid, like having validation come up becomes very easy when you're using Angular, because right now you no longer have to think about doing this right over there. The separation of concerns is actually very nice. So how do you do validation? You kind of create a division around here. You check, you do, so every error corresponding to this thing would be inside this, right? Email wala error. And similarly, the above one. So right now I'm just putting them as JSON, but you understand that if I were to sorry, if I were to correspondingly, so if I were to correspondingly format the output of these things, I can easily put out proper visuals for these things, right? So putting a validation becomes very easy and it's dynamic, which is another interesting thing. Okay. So this is one. So this is how you approach validation for a particular input field. Okay. And now if I want to disable this button, if this whole input field is not seen, how do I do that? I go for disable equal to ASP dot value. Okay. So sorry, my bad. This would be not valid. Okay. So okay, I made a mistake on the interesting. The down button. Okay, down button. So see, while this is invalid, the whole form is invalid. This won't get enabled. Only when both of the errors go away, only then can you this is what enabled. So this is one interesting way of doing this. Okay. But in many cases, you will see in the application, we don't do disable. What we do is essentially make this look disabled, but we kind of show, like, highlight the corresponding inputs in when this button is clicked. So you don't want this to be disabled, but you want to look disabled, kind of. Okay. So to do this, what we would be doing is they just give this a different styling. How do we give this a different styling? You have something called ng class. Okay. So ng class means we can put a particular CSS class over here and put a corresponding condition on which it appears like that. Okay. Okay. So suppose right now I okay. Okay, I seem to be making some mistake over here. I'll look into this again. But ideally, if you use ng class, you can change the appearance of this one. Let's just look it through, right? Okay. Let's not see it for later on. Let's just look it. These things would happen when I'm doing webcast. Let's see. Hmm. So the problem which was happening is like this particular NG class for Rxjs is actually inside a module called common module, and since I had and I didn't import this, the NG class directive was not working. So this should ideally work now. Let's see. And in the meanwhile, I'll just say what happens over here. And on click, I want to see if this particular contribute is enabled. So if this is valid, do something else. Else, you would want to change the sizing of the whole thing. So if okay. In the meanwhile, I'll just set up a few more things. So right now, the most of the fonts we are using right now use direct, we were using normal input fields and normal font fields, right? But normally you would never be using them. You would be using either matte font fields or and matte input nested. Okay. This is because since we're using material design, it makes sense to actually use normal inputs, right? So one second, sorry. And these work the same way. I would recommend that you do the same thing I'm doing because writing these things down or memorizing them is absolutely insane. Okay, that thing I didn't solve yet. I will look into that later on. Okay. Uh, yeah. Not sure why this is not working right now. This should work. I'm not entirely sure why this is not working. But okay. The next, so right now when this button gets clicked, you would want to set everything as touch. So what is touch? So material design and most components, ready-made components that you have, would normal input fields would look like this. Okay. If you click on them, they would come as focus. But if you move away from them, the state changes. Okay. They have become a touch. This has become a touch field now. And normally for users, you do not want to show them a red marked input if they haven't clicked on something yet. But if they have already clicked on this, you want to show them some sort of validation. Okay? And if suppose you are clicking a save button without filling in required fields, you would want to highlight all of them, right? So this sort of pattern allows you to do this. I'm not entirely sure why the NG class is not working. I'll take a look into that later and put that up. Okay. So, okay. The next thing we would want to look at is, in many cases you would want to like follow a value of an input field and make changes on the UI as and when that particular value changes. Okay. An interesting case for that is now form groups as well as normal inputs have something as an observable, which is called value changes. Okay. So before we start with observables, the first thing I would want to show you is a few things related to Rxjs, which you would find very useful. Okay. Let's start with a normal observable. Okay. So an observable. So how do you create a normal observable? Observable dot create. Import observable. If you look at the particular, let's look at the documentation of the program. So, hmm, so if you look at the documentation of observable or observable.create, you will see that it contains a method which allows you to emit certain stuff. Okay. So what does this mean? I'll show. Create has a function observer. Observer. This observer, let's commit 3 values. So definitely create a new. I'll explain what is happening over here. One. So here what I did, I created something, a new observable. Okay. What is an observable? An observable, if you have previously used any work with any sort of observable or any type of publisher subscriber, you would understand that observable is typically what you would call receiver or or something which you subscribe to. Okay. So when you're creating a new observable, you're basically creating you're doing something which is similar to new. If you work with promises, you would understand it's similar to calling new promise. But inside promise, you could call resolve only once. Inside observables, you can call resolve multiple times. Okay. So whatever pipes or whatever things we attach to test, or wherever we subscribe to the particular test, the corresponding value, this subscription would get executed for every portion that we put inside next. If we do this even after a timer, or if we do something like this, suppose interval, okay, interval, inside interval, we do, no, sorry, not interval, let's do with the set interval. Let's execute this every 300 milliseconds. And inside that, let's limit something. You can limit. Okay, and let's see what happens. You'll see that it doesn't execute very well. So it would execute after, it would stop executing because observer complete has executed. If we do set timeout and call complete after maybe say 10 seconds, then this internal thing will continue executing till 10 seconds have passed by. So keep your eyes over this. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 execute. After this thing would continue executing till 10 seconds pass by. Okay. This is because this observable, this set interval is continuously executing this particular line every 300 milliseconds, and that is correspondingly creating a stream of values inside this, which is being subscribed to over here. Okay. So this will, so see 10 seconds have passed and this thing has stopped. This stream has stopped. This observable has completed it. Okay. So why do we want to work with observables or some stuff like this, right? So the thing is like Rxjs, you all in the UI you always have a pattern where everything kind of, you have a bunch of event chemicals, you have a bunch of events happening here, you have a bunch of asynchronous API calls happening. It becomes very difficult to keep track of what is happening when, and a lot of problems regarding state come up. With Rxjs, this sort of problems literally just go away. Okay. So this is, we created a default observable over here, okay, which kind of executes for everything. So are there easier ways to create observables? Yes. So if you look at the documentation, you will see there are Rxjs mean you have other methods also which allow you to create observables like interval. Okay. Interval executes every based on the duration that you give. So suppose, yes, let's do a new test interval. Okay, let's make this emit every 300 milliseconds. Okay, and now let's subscribe to this. This will keep on executing like every. This will keep on executing for 300 after every 300 milliseconds till forever. Okay. Normally you wouldn't want a case like that, but you would probably want it to stop after a while, right? So how do we do that? So normally any point of time, if you want to make modification to a stream of values, you want to pipe the values. Okay. So pipe is essentially adding a modifications to a stream of values. To the from starting from the particular observable you had. Yeah. So since I'm starting from interval, the pipe would only modify this part, start modification on this stream and return a new stream, which is essentially the modified stream plus the operators that you have inside here. So let's use a particular operator which is called take. Are you for the take operator? Import Rxjs / that is the operator. This would take 10 emissions and then stop. This will go through 1 to 10 and then stop. Not 1 to 10, 0 to 1 to 9, 0 to 9, but okay. Now, you might think that these are like trivial cases, right? Which kind of cases do these things actually make a sense? So suppose we are trying to implement a feature, autosave of a form. Okay. If you're implementing something like a blog or something like that, you would want to save the form after a certain duration of time. Okay. So how do we do that? You ideally want to create a draft after every 30 seconds have passed or 1 minute has passed or something. So how do we do that? Then, so let's see what is happening over here inside the observable that Foundry provides us. A quick question: you guys are able to follow, right?
Somewhat.
Okay. Yeah, you were okay. So anytime any value on this form changes, you will see that that corresponding stream is emitted. You're seeing a stream of events based upon whatever is getting typed over here. Okay. And this might sound very interesting. Now you have a stream of values which executes, right? And whenever a value changes, you would want to, from the last emission which has occurred, you would want to create a particular, oh nice, the NG class is actually working. So I think I put the, this should have been not working. I put the conditional filter and it was not working. Anytime this form becomes valid, this color would change, and if it's invalid, it will change. So, which is actually you would ideally would reduce the opacity of this particular thing, but it demonstrates the fact which I was talking about. Okay. So let's see debounce in action for this. Okay. So let's talk upon the autosave wala thing that we are talking about, right? So every time the value changes for a particular form group, you would want to not take you wouldn't want to stay for every character change, right? You would want to see whenever a particular character change is triggered, you would want to wait for a few seconds, and after the few seconds are over, you would want to make an API call and save. And then once that API call is done, and the other emissions which would keep on happening, you would want to keep our next round of save ready. Okay. So let's just see this in action because this becomes very difficult to visualize when I'm just talking about it. Let's do one thing. Let's do a debounce time. Debounce time means you put 3 seconds, 3 seconds. Yes. You will see the emissions would only start occurring after every 3 seconds. So every 3 seconds, this particular method, this subscribe wala portion will check for. It's not like, but if no value changes, this particular thing doesn't go out at all. Right? Every character change doesn't go out at all. But a very interesting thing to observe is, okay, I'm making some changes over here, but how do I even know that if these things are coming up, right? So I wouldn't want, if this is instead of 3 seconds, it's like 5 minutes or something, I wouldn't want to wait for that. So you have another operator which is called tap. Inside tap, you can technically feed in the value of the pipe at a certain point of time and see what is happening here. Okay. So I don't think if you're very So the whole stream goes out. So these things which are coming from the taps are essentially these portions, right? So you're if at any point of time you're debugging, you want to see what is happening over here. You can feel free to look at the put in tabs to see what is happening at a certain stage in the file. Okay. Now an interesting thing. Suppose there are certain this is the input which we are feeding to form groups and form counters, right? And this way, certain characters like maybe spaces and these things are also accounted for. Okay. But if you're directly subscribing to some stream and you don't want to look at the value until it gets changed, you have other pipes also available which is distinct until changed and stuff like that. Distinct until changed, this would not let any values pass through unless the particular stream has a change at all. Okay. So if two values, if you have two consequential same values, the whole emissions wouldn't go through at all. You have a bunch of values. Okay. Let's look at a very interesting let's let's emulate a API call. Okay. So now at this point of time, you have a form group, you have value changes, you are debouncing by 3 seconds. Now you want to make API call. Okay. Suppose at any point of time, you would want to make sequential API calls, not parallel API calls, right? Because you never know if the next the later API call would go earlier and the older API calls would take longer to go. We don't want race conditions happening, right? So how do you manage that? How do you have all of these things execute? If you're connecting to a different uh, if you're connecting to a different observable altogether. Okay. So to do this, let's mock an API call. Let's just call this mock API call. This takes in some data and this returns a new observable. Okay. So after a timeout of maybe set timeout. So this is a very basic mock API call, you could say, which does what? Which basically takes in some data. It returns an observable. It has an observable emit back after 1 second. Okay. Maybe the emit back with actual value. Let's say this is. Okay. Now you want to make an API call with this, and ideally all of these should execute not parallelly, but rather not in parallel, but ideally one after the other. So how do we do this? We do concat map. Okay. So you guys see what is happening over here. Let's do one thing. Let's put this thing also over here and simplify it. Okay, this way we would be able to see what is getting saved and what. Can you see me? Okay. Suppose I make some changes over here. Okay. I keep on typing. This is a continuous stream of values. So that means it's reduced to 300 seconds. See, every time I do something, every time the bounce time filters out the last value which was there after 300 seconds, it makes a API call after 1 second when it has completed. then it creates the whole subscription, this console log and everything. That's why it's coming up to us. Okay. So these are two kind of, this is kind of how you deal with observables with respect to convolutions and stuff like that. If you want values, you can directly use this thing. Okay. Now, I would cover a few more interesting things with Rxjs right now, which would actually be quite important if you're using Rxjs in services. Uh, so the first thing is like observables, you have kind of four things available to you in Rxjs. Okay. One is subject, observable, one is subject, one is behavior subject, and one is replay subject. Okay. So what are these things? Four things. I'll just talk you guys through them. Okay. So uh, subjects are basically observables which you can also use to emit at any point of time. Okay. So at any point of time, if you create a variable as a new subject, you can subscribe to that subject as well as use the subject.next to send the subject a value. So so this has very interesting applications where cases like you are using the suppose you're using the header as an input field, and it has an effect on the footer field, or it has an effect on some other place which you don't directly have access to. So how do you have these two components communicate? You have them communicate through a service where one subscribes to the subject and other one emits to the subject. Okay. If you want to maintain state inside a particular observable, that is, if you want the observable always to have one single, the last emitted value inside it, you use behavior subject. So at any point of time, if someone subscribes to that behavior subject object, the last value gets emitted. And if you have, suppose, if you want all of the subscriptions to go through, which I passed through earlier on, you use replace subject. Okay. So these are the kind of observables you mostly would be dealing with. And inside forms, these would roughly be the use cases that would come across. Okay. There are certain complex cases that if you have nested forms, that if you have cases where you want to have more complex validation. But ideally, they would only be like transmutations of these things that we covered. Right? Okay. So, Madhav, you guys have any questions?
No, I don't have any question. I will go through everything next and ask you questions. Papa.
I have few things, but matter funny though didn't got those things. I'll go through the video and I will send you the.
Okay. No worries. Feel free to ask them, right? So it becomes very interesting if I can answer those questions, right? Because other people might be having the same questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go on.
I don't know if this qualifies as a question, but okay, this is I'll ask it. So I'm working on a side project. It's basically to do with Bluetooth and web Bluetooth,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a device that's constantly emitting some signals.
Okay.
So can I somehow use observables to, create a more human-friendly interface to that or something like that? Is that a good use case?
I'm assuming it's not written in JavaScript or any TypeScript or some sort of framework. Right? It's written some other language, or what
No,
language?
so in JavaScript only, JavaScript has web Bluetooth in Chrome and all. So Chrome, so you can access Bluetooth devices.
Yes, ideally you should be able to. So at any point of time, if you want to control certain sort of emissions, you can use the Rxjs for those things. So let's show an example with this, a very small example. Okay. So this is a very interesting use case for using subject and behavior subject. So can you guys see my screen?
Loading. Yeah, we can see.
Okay. So let's create a variable over here, and let's create a variable outside. So the good thing about Rxjs is that it doesn't need to work with Angular. Right? It can work with any kind of JavaScript framework that you have. You just need to use the library. Okay. So let's suppose that you have a certain method or something which continuously emits values. Okay. And you want to convert it into a stream for easier management, or maybe to use it with certain patterns like CQRS or something similar, right? So, or so let's see, let's do it. Let's see, let's call this like network emitter or something. So, one way to go around a similar problem would be that you create a new subject. Okay. And what the subject does is anytime that value changes via that watcher or whatever you're using, you want to use network you want to emit through this network emitter. So at any point of time, if I want, I can kind of emit values like this. Okay. And on other places where I want to subscribe to this emitter, I can kind of go over there and do network emitter dot subscribe and put in my corresponding logic over there. Okay. If I want to modify the stream or wait until the stream actually, if it sends multiple A's to me, it doesn't make any sense, right? If I only want distinct values, I can always do before subscribing, I can do a pipe over here and do a distinct until streams. Okay. So you only get distinct values. If you want to aggregate the values which are coming through, that is, you have A's and B's and you want a whole string comprising of all the values which came in, you use something like scan. If you're having something which would continuously aggregate, that is, if you have suppose we have a stream which counts values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you want the output at every emission that 1, 3, 6. That is the aggregation of at every point of time, at every emission. You want to use scan, and after completion of the whole sequence, if you want to use something like reduce. So yes, at any point of time, if you have something, anything of a changing value or a very dynamically changing value, using subject and a bunch of pipes would actually make life a lot easier. Okay. And this also presents a very interesting. So at other points, if you want to see the last emitted value which was there, you can use behavior subject instead of subject. So behavior subject, you need to pass in a default value. Right now, let's just pass an empty string. And behavior subject means like you can pass next. You can at any point of time this dot network emitter dot get value gives you the last emitted value which was there. Okay. So you have a bunch of very interesting design patterns, and you can actually use the same patterns that people use for integration and for syncing data directly inside JavaScript with Rxjs. And since you can process a bunch of stream values, you can use a very some interesting patterns you could use in other stream processing. Okay. Does that answer the question?
It does, it does. So the API which I'm using, there is no watcher or anything. I have to keep querying it or some stupid shit like that.
Mm-hmm. So if you remember that in our own API, in certain cases, we have a paginated API, right? But we need to pull in all of the data for doing some sort of query. So if you want to do something like that, earlier on with promises, you have to do a very difficult, confusing loop while portion thing, right? So over here in Rxjs, you kind of follow a very simple pattern. So you use a method called getCount, which gives you suppose the count of an observable which throws the count of the value. You pipe it. Okay. The next thing you do is convert the total count. Suppose this gives you a value as 350. Okay. So the next thing you would want is to convert this to number of pages, the number of API calls you want to, right? So whenever this value changes, you want to execute this corresponding thing. Switch map. Sorry. And range 0, comma. So let's say the count, we got the count from here. Count divided by page size. Okay. This would convert this particular thing into an emission which would throw out numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dot 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 till for each page that you have to fetch. Okay. Now you can correspondingly do concat map, and inside this make the API call corresponding to the given page, and at the end do a reduce. This way, this whole stream, just with this 4 or 5 lines, you now have the way to fetch in all of the data from a whole paginated API. Okay. So if you look at the similar implementations with Rxjs and stuff like this for doing concurrent API calls, you'll see a very convoluted recursive approach that we have to take, because there was no workaround for doing something like that. But with aggregate operators, it becomes comparatively much easier to do stuff like this, right? So, there would be very similar implementations which come like this. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I guess this is about it. Next, so these sessions will have mostly covered most of the interesting topics that we have. If you guys want, we can do sessions on because a little bit of Firebase if you want for the next session. That way we get to see actual API calls happening. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Okay.